The corridor lights in the vault of green never fully illuminated. They pulsed in gentle amber breaths, designed to imitate a dawn that no longer came. Beneath 6 kilometers of basalt crust, hydroelectric turbines droned with the steadiness of a heart that refused to give up. Leora Kale, senior archivist of the Gene Reliquary, walked those corridors in soft-soled boots, catalog pad balanced on her hip, ears tuned to the hush of recycled air. She knew every valve's sigh, every pipe's rattle. Today, one particular rattle sharp, a rhythmic chased her all the way to the carbon exchange wing. A sensor's red eye blinked above the door. Oxygen levels had dipped another fraction. They called the phenomenon the long fade. But numbers did not fade. They fell like guillotine blades, 1 decimal place at a time. Inside the wing, Director Myrta stood amid hissing conduits and condensation like a general surveying a ruined battlefield. "You see the drop?" she asked without turning. Leora nodded. 4 decades after Sol's luminosity had slumped 2%, a cosmic cough no one had predicted. The surface lay in permafrost, and dim daylight never reached more than twilight's gray. Underground refuges, thought eternal at their founding, were beginning to suffocate on their own exhalations. Scrubbers required photosynthetic cultures to stay balanced, and those cultures were dying faster than they could be coaxed into replacement. The last living chlorophytes were bleaching white. Myrta tapped a gloved finger against a flickering holo panel. A drone image flared to life. A frozen plain, ragged clouds, and impossibly one tree in vivid bloom. Petals the shade of sunlit copper glimmered against glacial blue. 10 days ago, Myrta said. Northern sector, coordinates 42 by 97, elevation 300, protruding from an ice ridge. A Celestine spruce, or so the botanists believe. Leora swallowed. Celestines were a theoretical hybrid rumored to have survived the dimming by shifting pigments, turning every sliver of light into sugar and exhaling oxygen with ferocious efficiency. Their pollen, once aerosolized, could jump-start any photosynthetic colony. In myth, they were Earth's final gifts, meant to rekindle air itself. "You want the pollen?" Leora whispered. "We need the pollen," Myrta corrected. "We need the pollen," Myrta corrected. "Our own seeds are meaningless without an atmosphere to grow them in." Expeditions topside had dwindled over the years. The last 4 never returned. Protocol required a team of 3, but geothermal failures and ration quotas left exactly 1 candidate who could identify viable pollen on site and keep it alive until vault re-entry. Myrta's gaze fixed on Leora with something between apology and command. "You know the cryopods. You know the isolation. You know plants. If you refuse, I'll order conscription, but I prefer volunteers." Refusal never formed on Leora's lips. She had inherited her post from her mother, who had inherited it from her own. Generations of Kales tended the reliquary, waiting for a day the seeds could meet soil again. "I'll go," she said, though her fingertips trembled. "But I'll need autonomy. No shadow agent with a shot pistol breathing down my neck." "Autonomy granted," Myrta answered too quickly. Most able-bodied rangers were busy reinforcing reactor seals. There were no shadows left to send. "You leave at dawn cycle." Dawn cycle was 2 hours hence. Leora returned to her quarters, an alcove lined with seed trays like organ pipes, and prepared. She packed nutrient gel, a microhumidifier the size of a pill bottle, thermal armor, an old woven scarf whose threads smelled faintly of cedar. Finally, she opened the reliquary's innermost locker, where ancient brass canisters rested under Santoku glass. 1 container bore her grandmother's script, "For the day the world asks to breathe again." Inside lay a dozen pollination vials, fitted with nanofilters. She selected 3, marveling at their weightlessness, then made her way to the ascent shaft. Few watched her departure. People avoided farewells now. They had witnessed too many sealed hatches that never reopened. At the airlock, Myrta placed a hand on Leora's shoulder. "When you find the tree," she said, "remember it is a living creature, not a resource. Ask. Don't take." "Of course," Leora murmured, though her mind raced with pressure metrics. Ask the tree. How did one ask, out on a frozen hellscape? A trio of pistons clanged, Floor plates shuddered, and the lock propelled her elevator upward. She counted the levels. Aquifers, geothermal vent chambers, abandoned city subways where mosaics of summer skies still clung to cracked tiles. Then the buffer stratum, an immense air gap to prevent crust collapse. Finally, the elevator halted. Steel doors peeled open like eyelids reluctant to face dawn. The world greeted her with a slap of crystal air so sharp it tasted metallic. Gray daylight leaked through ash-streaked clouds. The surface temperature would hover at -40 by midday. Night plunged past -80. She engaged her exo-hood, feeling the heaters hum along her spine, and stepped onto snow packed as hard as marble. Leora oriented herself with a faded star chart. In the dim, constellations were dull embers, but geomagnetic landmarks still pulsed in the instrumentation strapped to her wrist. A southeast wind scoured the horizon. She began to walk. Her destination lay 300 kilometers north-northwest, too far for a single trek. She navigated through skeletal suburbs where streetlights were icicles and cars set like husks half swallowed by drift. She bivouacked in a collapsed library, its roof providing weak shelter from needle sleet. Pulling her scarf tighter, she lit a chemical pouch, and the rising vapors smelled of burnt pine. Night's darkness now carried faint auroras, not the vivid curtains once photographed in school books, but thin ghosts rippling across stratosphere, visible only because the sun's glare had faded to a sullen bruise in the south. Beneath that spectral glow, Leora dreamed in snatches, seed vault corridors flooded, vines strangling pressure valves, her mother's hand brushing dusty petals. On day 3, she passed the solar mirror fields, thousands of parabolic dishes crusted with hoarfrost. In their heyday, they redirected sunlight into towers for energy capture. Now they reflected nothing, yet a hush lingered as if the mirrors remembered laughter. She saw her reflection, a lone figure in white armor, eyes wide behind anti-fog lenses, hair braided against wind-fragile, temporary. She moved quickly, mindful of sinkholes beneath cracked salt flats. Storms formed without warning. That afternoon, a wall of ice grit boiled up from the north. Mid-afternoon, a wall of ice grit boiled up from the Leora plunged into a culvert, crouching as gale force rattled the beams overhead. Her comlink crackled. Static resolved into a voice that should not exist topside. Archivist Kale, report position. She nearly dropped the device. Who is this? Field Ranger Hask, assigned to Council Oversight. We've monitored your vitals since departure. You're veering 3 degrees west of optimum route. I requested autonomy. Granted. Oversight is not accompaniment. Adjust heading. The line snapped silent. Fury flared inside her thermal suit, brighter than her heat cells. They were tracking her anyway. There was power in data, and the Council would not surrender power even on humanity's deathbed. Leora steadied her breathing. She would use their satellites if needed, but her choices remained her own. She emerged after the storm to find the landscape glittering, every snow crystal lit by pale aurora. Ahead loomed the highlands, a heave of basalt and ice. Data indicated the Celestine's outcrop perched among those ridges. Climbing the first escarpment proved brutal. Every third step dislodged crust and sent her sliding meters. By dusk, her calves screamed and frost-nipped eyelashes. She discovered an abandoned relay station, just a cylinder of rusted panels and broken antennae. But inside, insulation foam still lined the walls. She sealed the hatch, set the microhumidifier for her pollen vials, and allowed herself 30 milliliters of warmed water. That night, dreams returned, more vivid. She stood beneath a colossal spruce glowing like ember-lit glass. It spoke without words. You carry hopes, tiny and loud. Do not mistake purpose for ownership. She woke crying, though tears froze instantly. Morning of day 6, she crested a ridge and stopped dead. There, halfway down a terraced slope, a tree bowed under the weight of copper blossoms. It was smaller than she'd imagined, perhaps 7 meters tall, but every branch was plated with shimmering petals, each breathing out faint trails of golden dust. Surrounding earth was not earth at all, but rime-covered stone. Yet a circle 2 meters wide lay bare, black soil steaming gently. Life heat. Photosynthesis in real time. She toggled her wrist camera, snapping images for the vault before descending. The air warmed perceptibly within 20 paces, though ambient measurement held at -30. Some invisible microclimate radiated from the tree like a hearth. At the perimeter she knelt, touched the soil, and gasped. Mycelial filaments pulsed beneath, violet-white and vigorous. They formed a living lattice beneath the crust, channeling geothermal warmth upward. The Celestine's roots had allied with subterranean fungus to stay alive. Leora removed her gloves, an act of faith, and placed her bare palms on the bark. It felt alive in a way no wood ever had, vibrating like the throat of a singer. She remembered Myrta's instruction. Ask, don't take. I'm Leora, she whispered. Archivist, caretaker, descendant of caretakers. They sent me because everyone below is suffocating. If you offer your pollen, we'll carry your song back to them. Her words were no incantation, yet the tree's boughs swayed though no breeze blew. Copper petals loosened, spiraling downward. She fetched her vials, uncapped nanofilters, but hesitated. One could not capture a fall of leaves in a fist. Instead, she opened her scarf, spread it over the soil. Petals landed there like coins in a begging bowl. She gathered them gently with tweezers, funneling each into vials designated A, B, and C. Then sealed them. Microhumidifier engaged. Job done, she pressed her forehead to the trunk. Under that buzzing skin, she thought she sensed a pulse. Thank you, she said. I'll keep them alive. A shadow passed overhead. Leora spun, heart pounding. Above the ridgeline, a drone hovered sleek, black, council issue, its lens dilated. Her comlink chirped. Archivist, secure sample and stand by. Extraction team inbound. No, she murmured, dread thickening her veins. If the council believed they could mass harvest the tree, they might strip it bare, maybe uproot it entirely, chasing immediate gains. She had felt the living network. Such violence would kill it, and perhaps the miracle it cultivated. She clamped the comlink. Sample secured, returning on schedule. Negative, Ranger Hask replied. Maintain position. Leora yanked the battery out. The drone's rotors pitched, spotlight ignited, trained on the tree. She reached instinctively for her pack. Within lay a flare gun, standard issue for signal emergencies. She aimed, not at the drone, but at the cloud layer above. The flare streaked, burst into incandescent magnesium. Snow crystals glittered, blinding optics. The drone whirred, spiraled, lost equilibrium, and crashed into the ravine with a muffled boom. Silence returned, broken only by her racing pulse. She had bought time, yet every council satellite would trace the flare's coordinates. She had to leave now and move fast. Climbing down the south face of the ridge, she realized an avalanche path offered the quickest route to lower plains. She fastened her pack, cradling pollen vials close, then slid. Ice tore at her suit, shards scored armor plating, but momentum carried her half a kilometer in minutes. Rising, dizzy, she set bearings due east, an alternate path to the vault through collapsing metro tunnels, rather than the direct ice fields. The council would expect direct. She marched through dusk and into night. Wind-carved, wailing corridors through the crags. Twice she heard the thup-thup of distant rotorcraft. She doused her suit lights and hunkered behind frost-covered boulders. Each time, search beams swept the dark, passed over. By night 9, exhaustion transformed time to syrup. She reached the old megatube rail line, an elevated conduit now buckled and bowed. Conduits offered cover, and warm exhausts from ancient magma vents still drifted through cracks. She crawled inside, knees knocking, feeling heat rise to meet her frozen fingertips. Halfway through, steel groaned. The conduit began to sag. Decades of ice expansion were claiming their pride. She bolted forward, footfalls echoing like drum beats. A joint snapped behind her. Conduit floor gaped into darkness. She leapt, scraped across the rim, clutching edge with one hand while the other arm hugged her pack. The drop below vanished into fog. Fingers slipping, she used her free hand to yank a coil of mycelium rope fabric reinforced with fungal fibers that self-hardened on air exposure. She looped it over a beam, anchored her hips, and hauled herself up. A moment later, the section she'd clung to sheared off and fell soundlessly. Outside again, she stumbled onward. Food ran low. She chewed dried kelp ration, but most she saved for the microhumidifier battery, which metabolized organic mass into current. Every half hour she checked the vials. Pollen grains floated like captive suns, still alive. She reached the southern buttress leading back to vault grounds on day 13. From a promontory she saw what had changed in her absence. 2 plumes of smoke marked the ventilation towers. One tower flickered crimson. Internal fires or sabotage. Either could doom the habitat before fresh oxygen arrived. She hurried, snow crunching. The perimeter hatch recognized her ID, but required passcode override. System glitches from smoke damage. She entered to find corridors hazy. Alarm klaxons pulsed sluggishly, lacking power. Technicians ran trailing oxygen masks. Myrta staggered into view, eyes bloodshot. Scrubber, melt down, she coughed. We have maybe 12 hours before CO spikes fatal. Leora lifted the pack. Then we're not too late. In the seed lab, with watchers circling, she opened vial A inside a laminar flow hood connected to nutrient cylinders. A microfan dispersed pollen into algae cultures already prepped. Within minutes, monitors charted photosynthetic spikes, in, ILA, out. Levels quadrupled baseline. Cheers rose, but Leora cut them short. This is no cure, she said. We need living plantations. The Celestine remains the only parent tree. Myrta's gaze sharpened. Then we harvest seeds, send convoys. No. Leora placed both palms on the table. If you strip it, you will kill the network sustaining it. The tree agreed to help, not to be consumed. Trees don't negotiate, a counselor protested. Everything negotiates when survival is mutual, Leora replied, voice steady. We can cultivate from the pollen, grow daughters in nursery domes without harming the parent. Arguments volleyed, but breath was already easier in the room. Fresh oxygen sharpened clarity. Council votes run on fierce sway, yet living proof hovered on monitographs. Green rising, red falling. Eventually Myrta raised her hand. We followed the archivist's plan. The Celestine stands. Authority settled like a seed in fertile ground. Leora exhaled. Relief mingled with awe. She transferred remaining pollen to cryostats, then collapsed against a pillar, fatigue claiming her. As medics escorted her to recovery, someone rushed up, an apprentice she'd tutored on bean genomes. Archivist, the surface feed, look! Screens showed real-time satellite view, dawn across the hemisphere. The sun still dim, but today in that pale light, the atmosphere shimmered faintly blue instead of gray. It was a whisper of the ancient sky, not yet certain, but possible. Leora smiled, remembering the tree's vibrating trunk, the circle of warm soil on ice. Life could find cracks in marble and push upward. She closed her eyes, hearing, or imagining, a pulse that might have been her own heart, or might have been the planet's, beating louder now that it could breathe. Hours later, after sleep saturated with swirling copper petals, she woke to hushed excitement. A courier drone had returned from the ridge with a single image. The Celestine stood intact, blossoms replenished, branches angled toward weak sunlight like open arms. At its base, new shoot saplings had pierced the crust, their needles pale but determined. Leora rose from the cot. Her muscles ached, lungs still tingled with chemical antiseptic. But she felt lighter than any day since she first walked the seed vault corridors as a child. Outside her chamber, people bustled, not with the frenzy of crisis, but with the industry of gardeners preparing beds. Plans unfurled for surface domes, for fungal lattice partnerships, for giving back as much as they took. She thought of the generations before her who had filed, labeled, frozen every seed on faith. Thought of the last bloom on a frozen ridge that had listened when a human asked permission. Thought, finally, of a future measured not in dwindling decimals, but in growing rings of wood. In a pocket of her suit she discovered one stray petal, copper red, fragile as memory. She pressed it onto a blank page of her logbook. No catalog number, no barcode, just the imprint of something that had survived when the universe had suggested otherwise. That was enough classification for now. Later, when sun and oxygen allowed, children would stand beneath living crowns, inhale crisp air that smelled of resin and spring, and ask how the world had restarted. Archivists would tell a story of dimness, of faith kept in vaults, of a journey across a frozen earth to ask a tree for a favor. And how, because the question was worthy and the asker humble, the tree had said yes.